Hi again then guys, and welcome to yet another individual car review for Gran Turismo Sport, and again this is one of the new DLC cars to be featured in the game, in particular the newest addition to the Gran Turismo award lineup, and this includes in the past vehicles like the Buick Special and a variety of others, some which haven't been added to the game yet. The Aston Martin DBR1 I believe won the award, and a couple of others as well. Some which have been added, some which haven't, from award shows such as SEMA, generally upgraded cars. This one is one such upgraded vehicle, and I would actually say that this is much closer to something like the Buick Special than it is to, say, the Stilo Red Devil or the Pozzi Camaro, because those ones have huge straight line power and performance, but they're kind of over the top about it, whereas the Buick Special, it has that more low-rider kind of style. It's very fast, but it's not just fast, it's got a lot of that cruise appeal as well. And this particular vehicle, I would say, has that also. Now, I am really pleased to see this car get featured on the game, because I'm a huge fan of this particular shape of the Chevy Nova. Now, this car's powered by an updated engine, a very heavily updated one, a 6.2 litre V8, it's still rear-wheel drive, and that engine puts out 732 horsepower and an equally impressive 693 pound-feet of torque. Now that's stock, and stock of course is relative to you as the driver, and by stock I just mean before you've done anything to it, of course. The weight, though, is actually one of the most impressive things of all, because it only weighs 1,366 kilos. That's not very much for a muscle car, that's actually very good. And the horsepower per tonne, because of that, combined with, of course, the massive power as well, is actually similar to a Veyron. 536 horsepower per tonne is really good, especially for a car that you haven't even done anything to yet. As far as pricing, it's a 300 grand vehicle, which is a fair amount. That's quite a lot more than, say, the Skylines or the RX-7s or the Raptor that we've already looked at, but at the same time that's less than half the price as something like the Red Devil or the Trans Cam Mustang or the Buick on Gran Turismo 6. Those were over 700 grand, so 300 grand, that's not too bad in comparison. So the question, of course, is, with all of that in mind, and with nearly 1,000 horsepower of upgrade potential, what's it actually like to drive? Well, as you would safely assume, rightly so, it's not the most beginner-friendly of vehicles. At the same time, though, for a vehicle which is running on sports tyres, as this one is, with lowered weight and nearly 1,000 horsepower, on a track which isn't exactly conducive to, well, a 1,000 horsepower car, basically, it actually handles itself very well. Now, as of course you can see in the video, it is tail happy, very much so. It likes to burn up its tyres when possible, but at the same time it's very easy to control the slide in this car. It's not skittish, it likes to drift, but it's not necessarily twitchy, and that's a big differentiation to have. And I would actually say that this makes a very good drift car, a very fun one as well. It's very well balanced, it's well proportioned, and it's one of those muscle cars which isn't too tail heavy or too nose heavy. It's pretty much equal in a similar way to something like a old school Charger, for instance, which is also a really good drift car as well. As far as straight line performance goes, well, as I said, it's got nearly 1,000 horsepower, it's a muscle car anyway, and they're kind of known for being quick. The acceleration is very good, as you'd assume, but as you'd probably expect as well, you do need to be kind of already moving to get the best out of it. It's not great at launch off the line. It has a tendency to spin up its wheels, of course, but for mid-range and top-end acceleration, it is very good. It's possibly the kind of car that you might want to look into using as, say, a drag car for pulls rather than launch. So bear that in mind. It's a good drift car, a decent enough drag car, maybe even a great one, and as far as circuit potential goes, I wouldn't recommend having the power anywhere near as high for that, not just because it can't cope with it necessarily. It actually can cope with the power very well, better in fact than some other muscle cars of similar power on GT6 could, but at the same time, the main reason why I would probably avoid using it at really high end class levels is because it's just not competitive enough as an all-rounder on certain circuits. If it's a track where you can use that immense straight line power and torque, then by all means go for it in a similar way to the Hellcat. But, just like the Hellcat, you've got to bear in mind this is a relatively old school car. So for low-speed corners, for technical circuits, hairpins, 90-degree turns, something like an RX-7 or a Skyline, even with far less power, is going to have a pretty decent chance of outmanoeuvring it. If, however, you detune it, for instance, to say, I believe you can get it down to N500. I'm not sure if you could go all the way down to N4, I don't think it can go quite that low, but say N500 or N600, that is the kind of level where a vehicle like this could really come in handy, in a similar way to the Cobra, and this makes a pretty nice rival for the Cobra in a less direct way. So as far as these GT award vehicles go, it's an interesting one to have on the game. Kaz certainly seems to have a proclivity for these modified muscle show cars more than anything else. Those tend to be the ones that do get included in the game quite quickly. I mean, just look at the ones which we have. The Posse Camaro, the Stilo Camaro, the Trans Camera, the custom 1960 Corvette, the Buick, and a variety of others, very muscle car heavy, whereas something like the Aston DBR1, which did win the award, still isn't in the game yet. So Kaz, he certainly seems to be a fan of his muscle cars, and I can't knock him for that. I love muscle cars as well, but it's interesting to see the kind of preferential treatment that those award-winning vehicles seem to get over something like, say, an import car, which, given Gran Turismo's history, you would probably assume that something like that wide-body kitted Drift Datsun, which I believe also won the GT award last year, that still hasn't been included either. So, some interesting choices as to what cars they have priority for. But nonetheless, it's nice to have a proper old-school muscle car on the game, and one which breaks new ground in a number of ways. Because it's the first aftermarket tuner car on GT Sport, at least as far as I can think of, I believe it is. It's the first time that this particular car has ever been featured on the game, not just in a direct way, but this generation of Nova in general, and it's also nice to have a more traditional choice of muscle car, because you could kind of say that the Stingray Corvette is a muscle car, sort of, likewise with the Cobra, but they are sports cars first, muscle cars second, whereas this is a pure old school, true blood muscle car. Plus, it's got a red interior, which is kind of irrelevant, but I love that. Any car that has a red interior or a blue interior, I immediately have a lot of love for it. So overall, it's definitely worth checking out, and that's it for this particular pick. So I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.